Welcome to the I Am You podcast. I am your host, Dr. Nitza Alvarez, a board-certified cardiologist and best-selling author. My hope with this podcast is to share stories so women can speak up and become the CEO of their own health. I am a cardiologist. I am a wife. I am a mother. My story is your story. I am you. Welcome to the I Am You podcast. In this podcast, we touch on topics related to women's cardiovascular health. Today, I have a very special guest. You have been used to seeing patients who come here to share their story and their journey in a healthcare system that is not designed to treat women. Today, I have Dr. María Isabel Alvarez-Torres, a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma management. Isabel, just like me, we manage women. And I have the honor of having María Isabel here today. Welcome.
Thank you.
For those who are looking at our faces like this and see that it looks similar, María Isabel, who I will be calling Isabel during the podcast, is my sister. She has a specialty in psychology, and I invited her to come and share with us about emotional heart health, and Isabel is number 5. So for those who know my story, you already know, you understand the number thing. I'm going to start by telling you a story that unites us. We have a mom who has 10 children. A mom that, since I've known her, since I can remember, a strong, powerful, hardworking mom. The pillar of the family, the one who endures everything, the one who manages the money, the mom who does everything. I don't want to speak in the past tense because she is with us. However, Mommy, as we lovingly call her, was also a victim of cardiovascular diseases in women. And that's how she comes to me as a patient. Even though I don't treat my mom directly, I do direct her care from a distance, and I can feel honored to do that. But not all women in our country have the benefit of having a cardiologist at the bedside, directing the care of their mothers, their sisters, their friends, or themselves. And that's why I created this podcast. However, beyond my mom's cardiovascular disease, her emotional heart was also affected. And that was an eye-opener for us, showing that appearances can be deceiving when a woman is carrying burdens that sometimes become too heavy. And that's why we're starting this podcast by telling our mom's story, because this could be your mom's story, your aunt's story, your grandmother's story, your sister's story, or your own story. Isabel, I say that I've always said that if you and I were to combine our professions, we could take care of women as a whole. I'd handle the physical heart, which is the number 1 cause of death in women, and you'd handle the emotional heart.
Yes, that sounds very interesting and also very real, because there's a reason all these professions exist, right? Because one alone can't address all the parts that, make up a person, all their needs.
Exactly. So the heart, I've always seen it as an energy center, and I'm not making this up. I know it exists as an energy center. Many people might not understand that. We're not talking about chakras. It's an energy that emanates from the heart. You feel love in your heart, not in your head, right? You feel joy in your heart, and we always place it somewhere around here. So for me, it's super important because often when I see patients who come to me and we get into conversations about their daily lives, I realize that many of the things happening to them physically go beyond a physical problem. They have an origin in their emotional heart. Is that something you see often? Does that make sense? I want the audience, the women who are tuning in with us today, to understand that even though I manage the physical heart, there's such a direct connection, so they can have the tools to understand how emotions affect us. And they should know we're also going to give them tools on how to manage that. Can you elaborate a bit on that connection between the emotional part and the physical part? How does that happen?
Of course. To begin with, it's because often culturally, we haven't been taught from a young age how to connect both things, right? It's almost always like we see the physical part as something that has to do with the body, and the mental health part is more abstract, more related to the mind. Or they tell us, that's mental, that's emotional. But it's like we haven't been taught to connect both things when there is a biological connection, literal in our body between the mind and the body. And starting with the fact that we are, just by being human and being on this planet, we already have a huge mission to preserve life. And so our system is really made to preserve life. And if you notice, in our day-to-day, from the moment we get up, we're busy carrying out different actions, but always making sure that those actions keep us safe. From the food we eat, the way we drive, the way we conduct ourselves with others. And that line of thought, just think, if we were to see life as the game of life, well, the main rule is to preserve life, right? Starting from that point, from that main mission, our system has, and when I say system, that includes our heart, right? Because for us to be here today, talking and sharing this space, our system has to be functioning in optimal condition, or as well as possible. Now, where is that meeting point between the physical body and the emotional part? The game of life isn't that easy, right? Every day we're exposed to different situations outside, when we leave the house and often inside our homes as well. But we'll talk about that a little later. And every time we're exposed to a situation or a challenge, the goal is to overcome it. So this is where the question of how we do it comes in, how our body responds in order to meet that challenge. So, for example, let's say we were coming here for the podcast together today. Thank God nothing happened. But if we'd had a situation on the way, a flat tire, a tire that had burst, that's a situation we could identify as stressful because there was a schedule to follow, because you had several things you had to do in the morning, and so on. Stressful situations will always be a part of our life. So for us, part of what we have to do is know how to resolve them. And when we face a situation like that, suddenly our physiological response is, oh, I wasn't expecting this. And since it's something new, a change from what we had planned, a system is activated. Response system is activated. And what we call stress, when we say, oh, I'm so stressed, well, we can start by thinking of them as situations that arise, challenges that we have to figure out how to resolve. But when I resolve the first issue, that stress response that was generated in my body, which is biochemical, literally, we can measure it, and the true connection between body and mind, which is through these neurotransmitters that are secreted. The participation of a very important nerve we have in our body, which is the vagus nerve, which innervates from our spinal cord and extends throughout the different organs of our body, including the muscles of the face, the larynx, the pharynx. And through that external world, the way we face that challenge, we're giving information to our internal world. And at the same time, it's like a communication from the outside in and from the inside out.
So the connection is there. The connection is because for people who, when you started saying that people separate the body and the mind as if they're two separate things. If you can see there's a link, if you were to see them as separate drawings, there would be links that join them, which would then be the biochemical part.
Exactly.
Because you can't have stress without stress hormones being secreted in your body, what are known as stress hormones.
Correct.
So those are the messengers telling the body there's a problem here. Then the body will prepare for whatever that problem is.
Exactly.
So in that, we have the link of how they connect. Now, you are explaining that this connection has to happen because it's how we are connected, the body and what's happening outside. However, I'm going to take this moment to talk about what Takotsubo syndrome is, because I think you're already heading there, right?
Uh-huh.
Why was I so interested in talking about the physical heart and the spiritual or emotional heart? I'm going to use the word spiritual and emotional, but I'm referring to the part of our emotions, right? The reason I wanted us to talk about this is because many times we, women, are the ones who suffer most from Takotsubo syndrome. Takotsubo syndrome is a condition that in Spanish is called the broken heart syndrome. In English, it's called the broken heart syndrome. Literally a broken heart, a heart that got stuck, that can't pump blood, which is generally caused by strong emotions, right? But however, there are studies that have shown that women who are exposed to consecutive chronic stress, when that stronger stress arrives, whether from the loss of a loved one or from very strong news they received, because it doesn't necessarily have to be negative news. We have in episode 41, we have a patient, Laura, and I invite the audience to watch it, where she talks about her broken heart condition. And in that episode, she says it was a happy piece of news, and it was so strong that I ended up in the hospital with a heart attack, and it was from happy news. However, as I was saying before, many studies have identified that chronic stress starts to rise. And since you live with that chronic stress, you just need something added, a stronger stress, and you end up in a hospital with a condition that can end up costing you your life. That illness, how does what you were explaining relate to that? Okay, so you handle this. So now, how does that become chronic stress? What is chronic stress? How can that day-to-day become chronic stress? And how can people know they have chronic stress?
Yes. I really like this topic because we as human beings have evolved so quickly in terms of the way we live today versus maybe 2 or 3 generations ago. Let's say our great-great-grandparents or our ancestors. The way they lived, literally, as I mentioned before, the priority is survival. Well, if our ancestors had to go out in search of food and they faced a threat, an animal, a predator, a biological response is activated in our system. That's what I was talking about before, right? So we have a nucleus in the limbic system called the amygdala. There are actually 2, but we'll speak of it in the singular because that's how it's generally referred to. And it's like a little guard dog, a security guard or a smoke detector.
Voila.
Exactly. That identifies that threat. Because as I was saying, right, if the most important mission of being here is to survive, then there has to be a key element in all of this to be able to identify those threats. When it identifies the threat, it's the one that sounds an alarm and triggers a response. A stress response in the body to be able to handle that situation, to keep you alive. And there are different ways we respond, right? There are the active defense mechanisms where we can fight against that threat, we can flee, but also when fleeing or fighting might be more threatening, well, we can freeze. Exactly. And more recently, there are other lines of defense that are being studied and have appeared in research, which is when we can become compliant with the predator in order to diminish as much as possible the effect, the damage that predator can cause us. And here we're talking about when we have that predator inside our home. But going back to our ancestors, that was the way, right? That our system is created. But we've evolved so quickly that we no longer have to face elephants or lions to hunt for our food, right? Because now we just go to the supermarket. But our, so to speak, wiring, those neural networks still have a response to threats. But what are today's threats? Will I make it to the end of the month? Did my little girl get home okay? Day-to-day situations. Work, your partner.
Your partner, the fight, having to get home, okay.
Right.
All of us are,
The boss. Exactly.
that's inevitable.
That's inevitable. Those stressors will always be there. But what happens? Our brain, that little part I was telling you about, the amygdala, which activates in the face of a threat, doesn't know about the future. And we have a neocortex that we've developed, which is what also, specifically in the prefrontal cortex, differentiates us from other animals. Because we don't dominate the world because we're the strongest or the fastest, but because we were able to project into the future and start to create, to organize.
To prepare for what's coming.
Exactly. But that same ability we have works against us. Because when we imagine and project a future image of something we think might happen, it's usually not the best case scenario. Our brain is always thinking about the worst that could happen. If this is going to happen, it exaggerates it. And why? So you can prepare yourself to stay alive. But when you project that in your mind, the amygdala activates just as if it were actually happening. That's why when people say, I have anxiety, and when we talk about anxiety, it's that projected image in your head that's anticipating something.
That there's nothing happening right in front of you.
Exactly. There's no stressor present.
That's stepping on the table in front of you. No, I'm thinking that I have to go home, and I don't know if the dog made a mess in the house or if they fixed the stove that broke. So I'm thinking about the future, and the amygdala thinks it's happening right now.
Correct, because the amygdala is in the present moment. And when you project that, it's like being at the movies, seeing an image and feeling emotions. You know it's not really happening, but you feel all of it, right? So in a way, that's what's happening. Chronic stress, which is where your question was headed, occurs when I have different situations, right? Different situations day to day and one after another, one after another. And I don't know if you've heard of, well, you definitely have heard of multitasking.
No. Aren't all women multitaskers?
That's what they say, yes.
Especially now, I understand that now that I'm in perimenopause, it doesn't work for me that much, multitasking. But that whole multitasking thing, we as women kind of assume that we have to be able to multitask.
Exactly.
And that's a stress on the body.
Exactly. And it's applauded. I mean, socially, it's seen as a good thing. However, for mental health, it's detrimental. It's detrimental. And I'll tell you why. Look, let's do a very simple exercise. Do you have your right hand available or your left? Either one. Okay, let's assume this is the hand model of the brain. This is our brain. And here we have the brainstem, the area of our reptilian brain, the one that keeps our vital signs going right now. The stomach, the heart, everything it has to do, everything that's involuntary.
What we don't have to think about.
Exactly. So if we close our thumb like this, and my hand is so big and the rock on it too. If we close our thumb like this would be our limbic system, the emotional brain, let's call it, right? The amygdala would be here where this nail is. Now, the neocortex, where the part with thoughts, speech, and all that is, and where we can imagine, let's close our hand. Okay, the neocortex is covering everything. Now, there's a part of our brain called the medial prefrontal cortex, which is here in the front.
For those who aren't watching the doctor, she's touching her forehead. Just in case.
Okay, so this part here on the forehead would be represented by these two fingers here. Now, if I ask you to raise your index finger and your pinky finger, where do those two little fingers end up?
They're covering the amygdala.
Correct. Okay. They're covering the amygdala. This medial prefrontal cortex gets stronger. It gains substance, so to speak, or better connections with our limbic system to the extent that we do one thing at a time, or to the extent that we learn to be present, connected to the present moment, to be as what's called attention, in full mindfulness of what we're experiencing. But multitasking doesn't help us.
No, we're not connecting. We're not helping to strengthen this because we're not present.
Indeed.
We're doing 500 things.
Exactly. So if I don't have that area, so look at the little thumb.
No, look how it's shaking. Look how it's shaking.
So if there's no connection in the brain, essentially the amygdala will be hyperactive.
It needs something like a buffer.
Ah,
Exactly. If you mature this, which is mindfulness, which is being present, it's as if you're touching it. Like, calm down, everything's fine. So when you don't touch it, it's like,
exactly. It's as if that part calms it. It calms it, but if there's no connection there, or we haven't done enough to generate a sufficient connection between those two areas, we can have a hyperactive amygdala. And what does the amygdala do? It's what triggers that stress response. What is that stress response? The release of these stress hormones like adrenaline, cortisol. And what happens when we have excess adrenaline and cortisol in the body? This is when we see how our sleep-wake cycles start to get dysregulated. You were asking me earlier, how can a person realize that they've fallen into chronic stress? Well, when we use the word chronic, we're talking about it being long-term, right? In terms of time. When we say acute, it's intense, but in a short period of time. But how do we realize it? It's very difficult to realize it because
Because it's chronic, right? Because you get used to it.
exactly, because we've normalized it. And then the moment comes when you realize that you've almost always been this way.
That's just how I am. Sometimes we say, that's just how I am. I can't be still.
Exactly. And with that, it's like you've excused yourself, it's enough. And stress can also be camouflaged in a very subtle way. For example, if you were a very perfectionistic person or someone who likes to do things well, and you might be repeating the same task, or you don't leave work at the time you said you were going to leave because this isn't done yet, it's not done, and you stayed 2 more hours. And then you justify it to yourself by saying, no, because if I'm going to do things, I do them well, which sounds very nice, right? And we agree that we want to do things well, but at what cost? So it's like,
At the expense of sleep, at the expense of time with family, at the expense of eating well or exercising.
exactly, the same thing happens at work. Because at our jobs, it also happens that the more I show or the more I am, it's a sign of commitment to my job. It's a sign that I'm a person who isn't stealing money at work. And to the extent that I work overtime or I don't stop all the time, I don't even take the coffee breaks with my coworkers. The more I'm showing that I work, I'm trying to send a message that I'm productive, that I'm useful. And at the same time, I was saying it's camouflaged because you can say, it's just that I love my job. I'm so passionate about what I do that I can work from Monday to Sunday, and for me, that's not a problem. Well, of course, you might be enjoying it, but that doesn't mean your body isn't feeling the effects of that stress you're putting it through, of that never stopping.
Because there's no balance. Whenever there's no balance, there's stress, I would say.
Exactly. Whenever there's no balance, because we were saying earlier that the medial prefrontal cortex needs that stop, it needs to be present, and you can do many things. But if you do them all at once, are you really present in each one of them?
And so you started to mention that, for example, sometimes it's a little difficult to know if we're chronically stressed because as you're describing several things, I feel like I'm chronically stressed. I feel like, wait a minute, because sometimes it happens to me. And I'll say it here because I'm sure there are many women listening who can identify, right? We're women who are committed to our work. We have many projects. Sometimes my patients tell me, I don't even know when you sleep. And I say, I do sleep. I do sleep, you know? But sometimes it happens that I have a moment where I say, you know what? Even though I do my meditation exercises, my writing, I say, today I'm not going to do anything. And I start to feel like an anxiety, like I should be doing something. Why am I not doing anything? Why am I not taking advantage of this? I have 5 minutes. I have 10. And instead of being, okay, calm, I say, but wait a minute, calm down. So how do we know? What things, at least give us 5 little things that women can do as an evaluation and say, yes, chronic stress. I have to start thinking about it.
Yes, one of the first things we need to do is start observing ourselves. I mean, getting to know ourselves. How do you know, for example, when you have stress? Because how do you know? I'll give my own example, and then you can tell me if you want to share something. In my case, when I realize that, I say, I'm kind of stressed. It's because sometimes my right eye, the eyelid of my right eye, the twitching. Exactly. It starts to make like a little vibration, like that movement. And I'm at work, and sometimes I say, oh, and I could have rested well. It's not always because I didn't rest well. But for me, the eye is a sign. Another thing is that I'll see myself working and suddenly I'll go, ugh, like I'm looking for air. And I don't even realize that my breathing has become shallow. And when do we have that shallow breathing? when there's a signal up here, the amygdala sending a threat response signal. That isn't real, it's a perceived threat. Because I might be thinking, oh, I'm not going to finish this report on time. This report is due tomorrow. Look at the time. And so it's that whole thing of not wanting to fail, of I had to turn this in now. Otherwise, I promised that at 5 p.m. I'd be done to go pick up my mom for aerobics class or whatever it was. And you feel like you're not going to make it. It's like that's when stress becomes what we call distress, which is the bad or negative stress. Because it's when, in the situation you're in, you feel you don't have the resources to be able to complete it, right? The task. Or things are so rushed that you don't have that space for your system to calm down.
But if a woman has been feeling like this for a long time, is she going to be able to identify it? For example, for me, it would be one of the things that happens to me, the example you gave, is the breathing. Sometimes I'm working late trying to finish something, and even though my mind is saying, it's okay, this is where you need to be, finish this. But then I think, oh, but I'm not going to make it in time to be with the kids before they go to bed, that kind of thing. Or I told my son I'd pick him up from school, but I have 5 minutes. Then after 5 minutes, it's like, oh, I'm running late.
Uh-huh.
But since that's something you get used to doing, is it that easy, Like, okay, just observe yourself. In a way, it's basically like, look at yourself and then notice those kinds of things you're doing. For me, the breathing is obvious. When I'm working and I go, I can already feel that breath is from frustration. And I think, okay, hold on a minute. What just happened?
Acornis.
But lack of sleep, palpitations, high blood pressure from chronic stress.
And you can see it in your behavior too. How irritable am I? How am I responding to my partner or to my kids? And like you just mentioned, what are my sleep-wake cycles like? My rest at night, is it restorative? Is my sleep interrupted? Because when we have the cortisol hormone in our blood at very high levels, cortisol is supposed to be a cyclical hormone. At night, it should be low, and in the morning, it reaches a higher peak around 8 a.m. But if we have an amygdala in there sending messages about what I have to do tomorrow, and then I have to do this and that and the other thing, at night it can already be there, activating, sending that message. And that adrenaline and cortisol are still affecting our bodies.
That's why we can't sleep.
That's why we can't sleep.
Melatonin's supposed to go up, cortisol goes down, and then you can, rest.
Right. But that doesn't happen, so what do? We start taking melatonin, taking other things to be able to
sleep and fells.
Exactly. When what we should be doing is looking for alternatives to get to a point where when the evening comes, when night is falling, it's not that peak intense moment where I have to get to work to complete everything I didn't do during the day. That's when I have to start winding down and start being more compassionate with myself. So that initial observation of seeing how stress manifests in me, there are people who get back pain.
Their neck.
Yes, or they get gastritis, stomach irritation. And so it's about starting to understand how it manifests in you, because the way it manifests in you isn't the same as in me. Or maybe it is because we're sisters and some things might be the same for us, but it doesn't manifest the same way for everyone. And starting there. Second,
No. I was going to interrupt to say that when we have chronic stress, which I want to invite the audience to understand, we all have stress. We live such a hectic life that most of us have chronic stress, and we have to find tools to work on that. However, I had written a little note here that I wanted to share with the audience, or I put, it's the body saying, that's enough. It's years of caring, years of staying silent, years of enduring. That stays in the nervous system, and one day it reaches the heart. I see them because now the heart hurts, because now the heart is bothered, because it hurts me, because I'm short of breath, because my heart is palpitating. It's getting my attention. And that palpitation is a message that I can't stay silent about anything anymore. I can't endure anything anymore. I know you have some wonderful information to share with us, but you, my sister, oh my God, I got all professional. Oh, geez. About how that endurance or those traumas or those things that have happened to us that sometimes we don't even understand them. how they're impacting your heart. Because the women who are listening to us can't take this lightly. Because if we're talking about the number one cause of death for women being the heart, and that we have a chance to change that, one of them is work on your stress and your issues. I work with the physical part, your hormones and that kind of thing. Could you share with us that topic about ACEs and those things?
Of course. When we were talking before about how our body responds when we're exposed to stressful situations, it's to resolve that situation in the moment. But later, it needs to activate another system, which we call the parasympathetic, to be able to recover. The recovery phase is very important. We know this even with athletes. Athletes have very intense training, but then they need a recovery phase. They can't be repeating the same intense workout every single day because they get hurt. They injure their joints, their muscles, their internal organs. They burn out. So along those same lines, if we don't make sure that the parasympathetic system activates to have those moments of recovery, of restoration of our tissues, to be able to reach that moment of rest, to have restorative sleep and give our body's cells the opportunity to do their job of regenerating everything that needs, to be repaired. Because we have that ability to repair ourselves. Like when we get a bruise and our immune system takes care of it, we have that capacity. No. When we have a defense system in our body that is continuously active, constantly working without rest, and we don't give it the opportunity or the necessary time to recover and restore itself, studies have shown some important effects. For example, there's a well-known study, the ACEs study, which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. This research highlights the impact of ongoing stress on our health and well-being.
Adverse experiences in childhood.
Exactly. And forgive my English because my English isn't the most perfect.
So they'd understand that ACEs comes from there, but it's because it's an American acronym.
Exactly. This is a study that has been replicated in many places. Here in the United States, it's been done in about 30 states. It's been done in England, in Australia, in Europe, in many places. But it started in '98. The first study was revolutionary for public health because that's when, for the first time, our eyes were open to say, wow, how are the adverse, potentially traumatic experiences in the childhood of these people, how do they correlate with developing different physical and mental health illnesses from diabetes?
But I think one of the things is, with mental health, that's kind of expected, right?
Of course.
Of course, not necessarily. Many people understand that a father who yells or an alcoholic mother, it affected them. We all know that affects the individual psychologically, but maybe they haven't even seen it, or the individual doesn't know. But I think the most impactful thing about these studies is being able to say, it's biological. It's your body that's going to show it.
Exactly.
It's like, because from mind to mind is known from emotional to emotional. But when you say, look, your cardiovascular disease has to do with this childhood trauma, and it's like, what? Like, what?
Exactly. It's like it blows our minds to see that correlation. But now that we explain it from this point of view, it makes sense that if I have a system that's continuously active, searching for threats, receiving all that tension, all that cortisol, all that adrenaline, which is very important to keep us safe at one point, but when we have it in excess, it inflames us, we get intoxicated with cortisol, it does so much damage. You mentioned the name earlier.
The endothelium.
The endothelium.
The arteries harden, they contract, blood doesn't reach the organs properly, they start to malfunction, blood pressure rises, people's cholesterol levels go up, and plaques start to form.
Exactly. And cortisol has a very strong effect on the endothelium. So if from a very young age, a child, a boy or a girl is exposed to different adverse experiences like physical or emotional abuse, being exposed to an environment with domestic violence, sexual abuse, or other things. For example, they might live in a setting with mental health patients, and maybe that minor isn't well protected or is exposed to the person's condition.
Or children who have been in foster homes, jumping from one place to another.
Exactly. So There are different ones because in that first study from 98, they evaluated 10 different types of adverse childhood experiences. But the most important thing is that also that we know that the more adverse experiences a person has had, the higher the probability of developing illnesses, certain illnesses, from cancer, diabetes, heart conditions. And the study itself breaks down which conditions have been seen to be more
associated.
exactly. And for women, the risk is even greater because the study indicates that women, not that men are exempt, men also suffer adverse experiences. But in the case of women, it's been seen that they have a higher number of adverse experiences in childhood than boys do. So, they can.
Meaning we are more vulnerable as a gender.
Correct.
So if you take a boy and a girl and you look at those adverse events, women generally tend to be much more exposed than men. And as we said, the number of events correlates to the type of illnesses they will develop and which illness they might develop.
Exactly. And the risk of developing those illnesses.
One of the things that I personally think is actually a little bit sad is that many people say, and it is often mentioned, that there are actually quite a few women who don't even feel stressed at all.
Right?
So we know that stress is inevitable. We can't live. You explained it perfectly at the beginning. If our purpose is to survive, there will always be a level of stress because we have continuous threats that can go against our survival. But for it to become so common that the stress becomes invisible, that I don't even realize I'm stressed. I know that when we talk about, for example, when I see these women who have broken heart syndrome, even though they are so sick, that can be reversed. The physical part can be recovered with the appropriate treatment, medications to protect that heart, to strengthen that muscle, and 99% of the time, that heart, whoop, it goes back to as if nothing ever happened. It beats normally again. Nothing happened here. So, now that we're talking here, if we in the medical field can heal that physical heart, then how can we work to heal the emotional heart? Because there can't be an imbalance between the emotional and the physical. Because that woman whose physical heart we've already healed has to be able to heal her emotional heart so she doesn't end up back in the hospital or with a heart attack. How can we do that?
Well, first, as you were saying earlier, there are people who maybe don't realize it. It's already so normalized. Well, you think you're not stressed. Maybe you're not, but maybe you are. But to start taking conscious breaks, can we stop? And when we stop, when I say stop, that little minute.
What do you mean? Stop, sit down for a minute.
As I was saying, sometimes on a Saturday, I'll say, I'm not going to do anything. But then suddenly I start, oh my gosh, that little inner voice starts up. You should be making the most of this time. You could be doing this or that. If you see that you can't stop, that's a huge red flag that's been telling you for a while, hey, you're not used to stopping. Your body doesn't feel comfortable stopping. Your body doesn't feel comfortable with you taking these moments to recover. So that in itself is already telling us something isn't right here. How is it that I can go 5 days a week at such a high pace, at a real peak, and then when I decide to take 1 day to stop, to give myself a couple of hours of rest, I have this little voice inside me judging me or telling me, inviting me to make the most of the time? It's pushing me to a certain pace, and that has to do with how those circuits are operating. So,
if I can't stop, that's a sign that you're stressed.
Yes.
You're pushing that body, boom, 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 boom.
Correct.
If that feels comfortable to you, you say, okay, wait a minute, I'm having pauses in my life and I didn't know it.
Exactly. Okay. So, because not all stressful experiences during the day have to be negative because of what we were saying before, right? So, that's one, the first thing, being able to stop. Second, observe yourself. How do you feel in the different life situations you're in day to day? You go to the supermarket, you go pick up the kids from school, you talk to neighbors, you go to your job, you meet with your employees there. And our internal state changes according to who we meet, the conversation we had, how that conversation ended, if something I wanted was achieved or not, and how I am responding emotionally to those situations, right? That is our internal compass. Our emotions are a compass. Our body is always giving us information. With physical symptoms, because something starts to hurt and it's telling us to stop, or it's giving us some other information. But our emotions are often inviting us to explore some unresolved issue or some experience from the past that to this day still hasn't found that transformation, that processing of the experience we went through.
So how does the individual now? For example, you're inviting us to observe ourselves. So let's say I'm in front of an employee. We're having a conversation about an issue the employee has, and I'm observing myself, and I say, I'm noticing I'm a little irritated, right? So if I observe myself and say, my heart is closing up, I'm getting a little annoyed. You invite us to look at ourselves because it goes beyond the employee in front of me. It's your emotions are telling you that there's something you have that you still haven't resolved, that this person is reminding you of.
It could be from the past, or it could be something in the present. For example, okay, let's use that same example. I don't know, it depends on the topic that's coming up in that conversation, right? It could be very related to an unresolved issue from your past that you haven't been able to look at, or that you haven't been aware you need to look at. It could also be a need that you have, that you're very annoyed because you haven't yet been able to establish clear boundaries with that employee, and your internal world is stirring inside you to let you know something isn't right here. You have to speak up. You have to put words to what you're feeling, or you should do something.
So you weren't necessarily referring to that. You were just saying, look at yourself and that's it.
Exactly. Be aware of how you're feeling and allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, because just by allowing yourself to feel it, and that doesn't mean I'm angry and I'm going to throw
The scream and I feel angry and I accept it and I receive it. I don't say, no, I'm not angry because I'm a Christian and Christians don't get angry.
Exactly.
So then we're suppressing. Instead of saying, let me feel the anger so I can then let it go and work with it.
Exactly. Some people, instead of giving the emotion the space to have its time to be expressed, felt, and processed, they fill those moments with things. For example, I have an argument now, you have an argument with your husband. And suddenly, look, I'm leaving and I have a lot to do. I go to the computer and tap, 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 because I have to work on the podcast for this, for that, and I start generating content.
And I didn't let myself experience that rage.
Exactly. Annulment. So that's how. It's like not adding more.
If we've already added some and we're here, then at least for now, don't keep adding to that little trash can. At least don't add more little pieces of trash. Take this one out so you can work on the other one later.
Of course, give your body the chance to feel and go over that mountain, and then be able to find its moment to relax. Why? Because this is in the present moment. If we give that gift to our body, then every tissue and every organ, every system will have the opportunity to express what it feels, but at the same time to repair itself. Now, when this happens, when we're in that moment of, let's say, of that peak of stress,
Of allowing ourselves.
oh no, when we don't allow ourselves to.
Okay.
There's a response to a situation. There's an energy that's released within us. In the wild animal kingdom, Peter Levine, who studies the wild animal kingdom and compares it to us and says, why don't animals in the animal kingdom
Keep killing each other.
No, the zebra isn't going back.
Because the zebra isn't going to go back until the lion, who do you think you are? Sorry.
That's hilarious. Well, that doesn't happen with us. We can be more intense. But in the wild animal kingdom, when the animal perceives the threat and its defense is activated, it flees or fights, right? But then if the animal manages to get to safety,
It's happy.
exactly, it's happy. But the animal that blocks, that freezes, that plays dead in order to survive, because that's a line of defense that's also passive, because there's biological information we have that says, with feigned death, the predator loses its appetite when faced with an inert, cold body. And there are animals that have that ability to even lower their temperature to a point.
Like the opossum.
Exactly. So they don't always make it out, but when they do, phew, we made it. But what happens? The observation is that in the animal kingdom, the sympathetic system was activated for fight or flight. But when it was imminent that they were caught, feigned death came into play, that last card. But all that energy is highly activated inside it, but it doesn't move. When the predator is gone, the animal shakes. That's how it gets that out. It completes that cycle.
We should have that. If I have a fight with my husband, I go, I wish.
We could do that.
I go like this and get all the energy out and whoosh, it's gone.
I wish we could do that. You know what? Try it. Because I'm not telling you that's gonna work exactly like that, but moving the body, we were talking about cortisol spikes. And one of the recommendations for lowering cortisol is to get active, to exercise. People think it's just you have to exercise to look fit and to lose weight. No, this is a matter of health and well-being. If I move my body for a few minutes a day, I'm giving those cortisol levels that from multitasking and everything I haven't been able to avoid because my job is multitasking. I'm not going to lose my job. Well, okay, so let's add activities that help establish that internal homeostasis in our body. Well, if I walk, I'm helping to lower my cortisol levels. If I spend time with my pet, if I pet it for a while, well, there are studies that show that while I'm connecting with this other mammal, which is my pet, my oxytocin levels go up. And oxytocin and cortisol are like a seesaw. If oxytocin goes up, cortisol goes down.
That's why moms who are breastfeeding, their oxytocin is up and the baby, and you're calm and not stressed. Or if I'm stressed, I can't produce milk.
Correct. Because you can't relax. The system can't provide because it's in savings mode. There's danger here. What are we giving away?
So, according to Dr. Levine, in the human world, that doesn't exist.
Because due to the influence of the cortex, remember when I said that we can imagine the future? That we
make up a conversation and have a fight there, or what?
No, because when we're in a situation, for example, let's say that after I wanted to tell him a thing or two.
Let's keep talking about husbands. Everyone has an issue with that. But suppose at one point or another, let's talk about the partner.
Uh-huh. Okay, so the ideal thing is that if you move after that argument, you had an argument, but you put words to it, there was action there. And if you then decided to leave, the ideal thing is sometimes you go for a walk and come back with your mind.
A 10-mile one.
And you say, look, I came back more relaxed, calm. Or your husband went for a walk and came back.
But why don't we do that? Why don't we naturally tend to do that?
Well, the thing is because, okay, it's not that we don't tend to do it.
Now, you're giving me a wonderful tool for us to be able to handle that, the stress in that space. But how? Why don't we naturally do it like wild animals do?
Because we generally get stuck. We get stuck ruminating, meaning how after you finish a conversation?
Yes, and I should have told him this, and why didn't I say that? How ungrateful, I don't know what.
You start thinking about things from the past, or that this is more of the same, blah, 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 blah. And then you go to the future, like you even imagine everything that could happen.
That's the cortex that makes me do that.
Exactly. That makes you imagine that future. But what happens? Oh, sorry. The problem isn't because it's fine. We can argue and we can have different situations.
But we don't release that energy.
Exactly. That's the thing. You have to release the energy.
Can you go out and scream? Is that part of really when you're...
Yes.
That's why kids cry? Exactly. When they cry and have those tantrums, they're getting that energy out right there. And then they're like, nothing happened.
Exactly. Because the child doesn't have this. There's also what's called inhibitory control. We develop it with age. Inhibitory control is also here in our prefrontal cortex. It's that ability we have to be able to behave on a social level.
We're here. Behave, don't cry, don't scream.
Exactly. Let's say I fell and what I wanted.
Was to cry, but I was embarrassed.
Exactly. My body wanted to cry, to rub the spot, and even stay on the floor a little longer. And the first thing I did was to not make a scene. No, I'm fine. And the pain in my ankle and a tear about to come out. And I'm like, no, don't worry, I'm fine, with a fake smile. But in reality, I'm ignoring my body's natural response, which was to complain, ow, 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 and to bend over, touch it, to give myself that attention. And if I have to cry, and to stay on the floor for as long as I needed, to let them help me. Because social contact and that assistance, you were just talking about a broken heart. And one of the most important things is to let people help us, to let them listen to us, to let them give us a hand because we don't heal alone. So we ignore that instinctive response from our body. We're not used to listening to ourselves. And so that inhibitory control takes command of the situation. But that doesn't happen with children because children don't have that same developed inhibitory control. They develop it over time until they become adults. The problem with what we were talking about with ACEs, right? About how people can develop that risk also has a lot to do with what the response was to those adverse childhood experiences. Because generally, a child, when faced with an aggressor, whether it's a father, a stepfather, whoever it is, right? Whenever the boy or girl is experiencing, when there's an adverse experience, their defense response is usually not to fight. Because that could be more dangerous. The brain knows this, and it has to preserve life. It's not to flee, because sometimes fleeing can also be more dangerous. Usually, the freeze response is that third. It's the main one. But what did we say happens in the freeze response? All the energy's inside.
So I have to shake that off.
Exactly. And that energy got stuck in a loop that never got out. That's why in adulthood, it's important that we can also look back. Be compassionate with ourselves and give ourselves the opportunity to look at that past and be at peace with that past in the sense of what is left to be resolved. What was it that child couldn't do to give them the opportunity to complete that cycle, which very likely to this day is still having an effect on our system, our nervous system. And we know that from the nervous system, it goes to the cardiovascular system and other systems in our body as well. So maybe I can't change the past to fix the damage that was already done to that system. But if I continue in permanent states of alert unconsciously, which are effects of those past experiences, it will continue to have an effect. And even the ACEs study shows that the greater the number of adverse experiences, the shorter a person's lifespan. It's not just that they develop conditions, but premature mortality.
Exactly. So if you're going to do it, if you're not going to do it for any other reason, at least if you want to live a long time, then you have to manage those.
And the quality of life you want to have. So maybe we can't repair what we've already lived through, but we can put a stop to the pace of our internal world by also addressing in the present those situations that happened at some point and that maybe to this day still haven't been spoken about, haven't been worked through, or haven't been resolved.
So, well, to go back and close the loop on the story we started with.
Yeah.
You always have to pay attention to the body, right? You have to listen to your body. The body is sending us a message that something isn't right. Because that's also part of survival, right? Something hurts here. Something doesn't feel right here. The message we want to give our audience is that, yes, take care of your heart. Go there first, like we did with Mom. Let's take care of the heart first. For Mom, she thought all of this had to do with anxiety and stress. And then with me there, I was like, no, because that's what we're trying to teach women here, that sometimes cardiovascular problems can manifest as anxiety or stress. We evaluated her, diagnosed her, treated her, and then we moved on to her emotional heart. Because a lot of things were discovered then. Many of those things had to do with traumatic childhood events that for many people, even though they don't think they have them, because even myself, as you've helped me many times with all this, it's like, oh my God, I didn't know that had affected me that way. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a violation like we sometimes think. But I had a wonderful home. My dad was good. He took care of me. My mom was good. She took care of me. And I went to a very protected school, and no one ever touched me. No one ever did anything like that to me. And it's like, look, my love, it could be that your dad made a comment about something at a moment when you were expecting something else, and you didn't realize how that marked you. Until later, as an adult, you say, but why do I do this? And when you look back, you say, that was a traumatic childhood event that I didn't know how to handle at that moment. My dad or my uncle didn't mean to hurt me. They made a comment to protect me, but my brain processed it differently.
Exactly.
So that helped me a lot because sometimes you think, no, I don't have trauma. And it's like we all do. We all have it because we don't have the tools at the moment. We're very little. Sometimes it's even that they took a lollipop or a bicycle from us, or they brought me something I didn't want. I mean, it doesn't have to be gigantic things. Of course, this isn't to minimize people who have gone through very serious problems, right? Even living in a home with parents with drug or alcohol problems, alcoholism, oof, or even a mom who is struggling to raise her children alone, that's a stress for the child too. So sometimes we don't recognize that as a trauma for the child. However, I think that if the call to action is always, yes, take care of your physical heart because it will cost you your life, you have to tend to it, but we can't do that without also exploring the emotional heart. So we can leave with this. Look at yourself. Stop, take a pause, be with yourself, be compassionate, and then also seek help. Because there are many professionals like you who are available to help, right? So if a woman says, you know what, I'd like to explore this a little more, where do you recommend they look for information? Where can they find a psychologist? What's the best way to do that?
Well, look, that also depends on where the person lives, and what the focus is, what their interest is. But if it's a person who is already identified and you say, look, I know I went through these experiences and that to this day, I know this still affects me. Because after I had that experience, still to this day, for example, I can't visit places with these characteristics. There are certain smells that,
Or I worry that my children will go through that. I understand that could also be it, right?
wait,
I haven't been able to get over it.
exactly. But you recognize that somehow it still limits you in the present. It has an effect on your life today. If you identify that you have an adverse childhood experience, there are different therapy models. One of them that I really like is EMDR, which is focused on trauma. There are different trauma-focused therapy models, but I'm going to give you this one because you asked me, and I'm not going to recommend something other than what I know to this day has had good results with patients. EMDR, you look for a therapist who's certified in this therapy
In your area.
in your area. And if there isn't one in your area, well, there's a website we can share in the podcast description, which is EMDRI, the EMDRI website, where you can locate by location which psychologists are near the area, or you can also find one who is virtual. And so that can help you with that. But in the earlier you mentioned, Mom, that you first attended to the physical part, right? And it's that both were coexisting. And so that's very important that also for mental health professionals, we have to keep in mind, not everything is emotional. And a person can come in with symptoms of anxiety and so on. But having this knowledge from the physical side, how cardiovascular conditions manifest in women, it's very important that we're also very clear so that, okay, we can work on this. But in the meantime,
Go see a cardiologist.
you go and talk to a cardiologist and let's make sure the physical part is taken care of. Because in Mom's case, thank God she has you. And you said, no, we're going to do this and this and this first. And on the other hand, we, being two sisters who are also psychologists, well, we started to provide help to Mom, and then we're able to channel her through a psychologist and psychiatrist so she could continue her treatment. And to this day, well, we can say that what you started by saying, that we combined our knowledge, our professions to be able to work with her as a whole. But without forgetting that it wasn't half and half, it's that they are interconnected.
Interconnected.
And an important thing is that when you described mom at the beginning as a strong woman, and mom has always inspired in me a lot of stability, a lot of security. If I say that I have internal resources that have to do with that emotional regulation, it's because mom was always that pillar in the family for me. And when I would go to competitions and stuff, she always had like the perfect words so that I would go without so much stress to my competitions. So seeing her in a situation like this was like, oh, wow, I didn't think. My mom is also a very spiritual person, you know? Her religion is also part of her strength. But at some point, this came to the surface. What I mean is, as you were saying earlier, there are people who think, but I haven't had any traumatic experiences. And it may be that it's there, latent, like a hibernating bear that hasn't come out yet, and that's okay. You just go on with your life. But the moment you start to notice when something starts to emerge in you, don't fight those symptoms and seek help.
Don't wait for the volcano to erupt.
Erupt, of course, because something can always happen on the outside that will connect you with that past story, and your body will be your compass. It will show you what's there. Listening to your body so then I can find the professional who can help me navigate. Because it's easy for us to say, no, you have to work through traumatic experiences. Yes, because maybe we didn't live through many of those experiences that for many of the people who did, it means going back to the past and facing those monsters. Like, how do I face that now? So it's about finding a professional who can safely accompany you to look at that past and be able to process it.
But the body is so wonderful. Notice that sometimes it's what we're talking about. Even though many of those women will come to my office before they get to yours, it's the body that's speaking. So if I now and many professionals like me say, okay, I'm going to treat your heart, but this doesn't end here, right? Because we're talking about an emotional heart that's interconnected. You may not know what's happening with that emotional heart, but I am clear that there is an emotional component in this care that you deserve. You deserve it. Not that you need it, that you deserve it. And then there can be an opening to then work on other aspects of our lives that will make us better moms, better wives, better partners, and even better companions on the journey for ourselves. I am so grateful that you came from Puerto Rico to be here and spend this time with me. This was a dream I had. I'm happy it came true. Isabel does have services in Puerto Rico, but right now she's in the process of opening her practice. So when we have a little more information and we have all the details, well, then we'll be happy to share it here with you all. And in the meantime, until next time, Isabel, thanks for everything.
Thank you for making me part of this great project. And, no, in the past, I wouldn't have imagined that we could find a space until you proposed it. And I said, of course. So I'm very happy too. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And you know that anytime in the future, we can also share other things.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack, so much material. And, the thing is, well, we have other things to do today, right? And this brings us to the end of another episode of I Am You. If you liked this podcast, if you found the topic interesting, leave us a comment. If you're interested in us discussing similar topics or any topic that also has to do with the emotional heart, feel free to leave comments so we can then continue to include that material that you all like so much and that benefits us all, us, our families, and society. And this is the end of the podcast. See you later. I hope this episode has empowered you to be the CEO of your own health. Tune into our next episode. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at NITZAMD, NITZAMD. To explore more on this and related topics, visit our website, NITZAMD.com, NITZAMD.com. If this episode resonated with you, please like and subscribe. And one more thing, share with the wonderful woman in your life.